I ask myself, where are the creators today? Where are the innovators today? Who are the people who are leading the new ideas and innovating new concepts? Are they dead and gone? Or are they still here? And if they're here, who are they? And where are they? I'd like to suggest they're here tonight. They're in you. They're in me. We just need to activate the creators, the innovators that are in us, that we've inherited, that have been passed down to us as a legacy. This is our legacy. The question is, what are we doing with it? I think it's time we reactivate this creative energy that has been embedded and brought to us through our lineage. Otherwise, we're wasting it and we're actually neglecting our responsibilities. So here we are tonight. This is just part of that journey. And so I want to bring to you someone who is already trying to resuscitate through poetry and spoken word the creative genius of our ancestry. So join me as we welcome to the stage none other, someone who has been here before and will probably likely be here again. Main Issue!
Love. I hope y'all are in love with yourself. But that's the first love. That's the first love. We talk about giving love to each other. We talk about unconditional love, but until we have that unconditional love for ourselves, we're not able to give it to others. So, I love the fact that Jaden's doing what he's doing. Shout out the man right now. Everything that he's doing right now, wifey, everything. I really love and support everything you guys do, because what a lot of people don't realize, a lot of things is going over our heads in terms of where we come from. And a lot of times we're wondering where to go. And we keep wondering where we're going without realizing where we're from. So what often happens is we stay like this, wondering if this is actual life, and we come to condition thinking that that's life. But in reality, all we have to do, is study where we actually come from. Study the actual truth. Don't be scared to go deeper. You know what I mean? A lot of people are good with face value and they leave it at that. What TV tells us, they leave it at that. But I feel like we can go deeper. So through music, through spoken word, I'll give you a little something that maybe we can relate to it. Awaken, I woke up awakened. I take in and soak up a full cup of faking. They can't get their soul. It's up for the taking. For taking that shortcut they took up with Satan. It's crabs in a bucket where up is forsaken. Cash from a bucket's worth taking. Her class is deducted from custom to straighten. All stuck in mistaken, I'm escaping. This noose of confusion that puts us in churches. Don't look for yourself, don't look for your purpose. When voicing this knowledge, they push from the surface. But poisonous products they push us to purchase. It's bullshit, it's worthless. You cook what reverses. My food puts me forward. Yours puts you with nurses, then puts us in hearses deceased. The funeral service, the purge it repeats. Because we're eating the food at the funeral that put Miss Mary under the ground. At the funeral, we're eating the poison, the reason why she's under the ground. So, poisonous products they push us to purchase. It's bullshit, it's worthless. You cook what reverses. My food puts me forward. Yours puts you with nurses, then puts us in hearses deceased. Funeral service, the purge it repeats. I've been telling them, but they fell in the spell of the gentleman. Hidden lies, but I get in between them, like I fell in the spelling of Eminem. It's our melon, they're sending the venom in. When we're dead, they've been selling our melanin. I don't preach, I just give them what I take up. Pulling sheets off my people, time to wake up. You know how you feel? Come on now. Yeah. I found another way. This brings abbreviation. This is another day. This is appreciation. This is to hold your own. This is initiation. This is for those alone. This visits beneath the station. This is the reach of keys. This is release my nation. This is the freedom from freeze, resist police relation. This is for deeper thoughts. This is for recreation. This is for eager hearts. This is alleviation. So if you fall, it ain't a shame. Never cross, stand tall, learn to tolerate the pain. Learn to automate the brain. It's automate your lane. I saw so much along the way, some of us ought to take the train. In the past, trust I've been in the fast. Guns have hit in the blast. Drugs, adrenaline, cash, but within a flash, dozens is in the grass. I cut to the thickest trash just to give them a path. Love. I finally got a feel for heel. Now I'm steering, I could feel the wheel. I reveal the real. They say we gotta keep it real, but still, they missed the point. That's Shaquille O'Neal. For the meal, they'll kneel. Y'all think these people popping pills for thrill? Different liquors to conceal the feel? Never seal no deal. Won't sell my soul to let them steal my skill. Won't sell my flow to help fulfill your drill. You know what I'm talking about? Because to the left's where they're staring us. Our goals they intercept, or the refs interfere in us. Which just injects all the fear in us. Deception in its best, in the depths of delirious. Your blessings in a test, don't let stress get you furious. Your questioning's a quest, just the steps of the curious. Every breath's an experience, a message to the deaf. I won't rest till you're hearing this. Blessed love, that's what I got for y'all.
Come on now! Come on now! Come on now! Come on now!
I'll give you one more.
Let's get one more.
It's a million more. Holy. Let's see. Prison with these rules, you're restricted. Limiting your views to the views you're addicted. You can't see the bruises afflicted, the spiritual abuse that just proves what the trick did. Let me start that again, because that goes over a lot of people's heads. Prison with these rules, you're restricted. Limiting your views to the views you're addicted. You can't see the bruises afflicted to spiritual abuse that just proves what the trick did. Walking in these shoes is predicted. We end up on the news because they choose what's depicted. It's scripted. Often this concludes us conflicted to make sure that we lose the confused to convicted. To keep the black and asleep, clocking for scraps, we slave yet never happened to eat. Walking in traps, they made for every crack in the street, till walking on backs is way to getting back on my feet. Hold on. Walking in cracks, they made for every crack in the street, to walking on backs is way to getting back on my feet. So I need to walk amongst another person in order to feel like a man. In order to feel like I can get back on my feet. Forget y'all down there. Right? Let me get back where I was.
You got it, bro. You got it.
So, I'm going to start again. Prison with these rules, you're restricted. Limiting your views to the views you're addicted. You can't see the bruises afflicted to spiritual abuse that just proves what the trick did. Walking in these shoes is predicted. We end up on the news because they choose what's depicted. It's scripted. Often this concludes us conflicted to make sure that we lose the confused to convicted. Right? To keep the black in the sleep. Clocking for scraps. We slave yet never happen to eat. Walking in traps. They made for every crack in the street. To walking on backs is way to getting back on my feet. Crime, time, can't bring it back or repeat. This present's a package we keep, like we lack a receipt. I'm only giving them real. No more listen and feel. I'm on a mission to heal like the back of my feet. We gotta let go. Blessed love, y'all.
All right. We are now arriving at our second migration, which we will be speaking about. The first migration dealt with the migration which occurred and took place off of the west coast of Africa into the Gulf of Mexico. This migration will have to do with all things as it relates to the Bering Strait, or the Beringia land bridge, as it's referred to. So before I even get into the first slide of this presentation, or portion of the presentation, I really want to give a little bit of context as to what I'm going to be attempting to do here. As I mentioned, what we're looking at is a very interesting part of the world, the Bering Straits, an area of the world where the Siberia connects to Alaska, North America, and where we are about to identify and find out that a lot of migration patterns occurred as well. So what I want to do is I want to really highlight that what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be starting at the beginning area, at the area of Exodus, and I'm going to be going sequence by sequence, country by country, and I'm going to be identifying a body of movement of people who possess a lot of the same qualities, a lot of the same characteristics, a lot of the same attributes. And as I've always mentioned, while I do not intend on just speaking objectively and letting everyone know what it is, how it is, what it looks like, what I will be doing is leaning heavily on peer-reviewed journalism, academic papers, and primary source testimonials to highlight what I can confirm as it relates to the ancient exodus out of Africa and how that played a role in the first inhabitants of what we would look at as Paleo-America. So this is the second migrations, ladies and gentlemen. This one is a bit more exciting because we enter Canada, our home, and we get to look at the first footsteps in North America and South America, as well as Central America. So without further ado, we are going to begin. So we're going to begin smack dab in the continent of Africa. And as I mentioned, being that Africa is the birthplace of humanity, this is going to be our point of departure. So this title slide is called The Birth and Development of Humanity, the First Exodus of Homo sapiens. So Africa has long been regarded as humanity's evolutionary Garden of Eden. In the 1921 discovery of a large-brained archaic hominin known as Broken Hill Man, which was found in present-day Zambia over here, was roughly 400 kilometers south of the modern Democratic Republic of Congo, demonstrates that advanced ancestral human populations were already established in Central and Southern Africa during the Middle Pleistocene epoch, upwards of 200 to 300,000 years ago. So illustrations that come out of Civilization or Barbarism by Sheikh Anta Diop, a Broken Hill Man, show us the craniometric structures of this archaic hominin, which existed in the central and southern regions of Africa, once again in between 200 and 300,000 years ago. Now, Africa's major river systems and lake basins, such as the Omo River Valley, Lake Turkana, as well as the Nile Valley, formed ecological corridors that fostered early human development, and it is within this framework that genetic studies led by a multidisciplinary team of scholars at Oxford University identified the African origin of the anatomically modern human Homo sapiens sapiens. As a conclusion reinforced by fossil evidence from the Omo River Valley in Ethiopia dating approximately 200,000 years ago, and corroborated by mitochondrial DNA, shows that all humans today can trace their ancestry to an African population that lived in between 140 to 280,000 years ago. Okay, so what this shows us is at least 300,000 years ago, 200,000 years ago, you have archaic hominin Homo sapiens sapiens. Now, to some people, that might sound like a very far-fetched thing to believe, but I want to highlight that, our first modern tool-making men, or men of hability, or Homo habilis, can be found in Kenya, and that's 1.8 million years old. So, upright, bipedal, large-brained hominins are a lot older than some people might like to recognize. So by approximately 100,000 years ago, the anatomically modern Homo sapiens were firmly established in the Horn of Africa by Ethiopia and Somalia, a region separated by only a narrow maritime corridor from Arabia Felix, which is the southern area of Arabia. And both geography and ancient traditions preserves account of an early Ethiopic people crossing into southern Arabia, an encounter made possible by the cognitive, technological, and social capacities of early Homo sapiens, and marking what is widely regarded as humanity's first successful exodus out of Africa. So the area in question I'm referring to is the area over here between Djibouti, that connects Djibouti to Yemen, and it is called the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Can we all say the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which separates the Horn of Africa from southern Arabia, which is approximately 18 to 30 kilometers wide. And during periods of the lower ice age, sea levels on this maritime crossing would have been a lot easier than it usually is. So here we are, the beginning of the exodus out of Africa starts noticeably in Africa. We know hundreds of thousands of years ago we have hominid activity here. We know in the Democratic Republic of Congo and then by the Semliki River, we have the Semliki harpoon, which shows a 90,000-year-old aquatic civilization in Congo. So what I am supposing to you, what I'm letting you know happened is upwards of 100,000 years ago, we have people walking around, upright bipedal walking hominids in the Horn of Africa that were able to migrate into southern Arabia. So we're going to start from here and we're going eastwards. So we're going to follow this exodus out of Africa and see where we end up. Scholarly consensus: the Arabian Peninsula as an extension of Northeast Africa. So the Arabian Peninsula was once a part of Africa, but was eventually separated during the Pliocene plate tectonic rift, which happened 5.3 to 1.8 million years ago. Now that formed the Red Sea that we see here. Nevertheless, Arabia remains an ecological continuation of Northeast Africa. Now, archaeogenetic studies indicate that all modern human populations outside of Africa, once again, all modern human populations outside of Africa descend from a progenitor African group that migrated into Arabia upwards of 70,000 years ago, that likely via the southern route across the Bab el-Mandeb. Now, there was a lot of people to highlight primary testimonials, but being that my darling beloved is part Italian, I leaned on an Italian testimony. I want to highlight the Italian, I'm just going to keep it a book. I want to highlight I'm going to see if I get his name right, Maurizio Tosi. From 1944, he lived until 2017. He confirmed Arabia's African continuity, stating that, quote, in general, Arabia is the continuation of the African system across the Red Sea. Physically, the Arabian Peninsula is a part of Africa, landscaped by the same geological and climatic processes as the Eastern Sahara and the Ethiopic highlands. So this is a very renowned, very notable, very professional, very academic archaeologist, Maurizio Tosi, attesting that in general, when we take the word semantics out of it, Arabia is an extension of Northeast Africa. So when people start talking about the Northeast and the Middle East, I ask, just like Dr. Ben asked, the middle of what? What are we talking about? Early South Arabian civilizations, most notably the Sabians, who are discussed at length in Juzila Junzi Houston's The Wonderful Ethiopians of the Kushite Dynasty, of Arabia Felix, modern Yemen, emerged in classical and biblical traditions as part of an ancient African cultural continuum, identified with Sheba, which Kush. The Sabians represent a settled and highly developed society whose institutions, trade networks, and symbolism traditions parallel those of the Nile Valley and the Horn of Africa. Scholars such as Sheikh Anta Diop and Runoku Rashidi have long associated South Arabia with African-linked populations extending into early Mesopotamia. Listen again. Sheikh Anta Diop and Runoku Rashidi have long associated South Arabia with African-linked populations extending into Mesopotamia, where Sumerians self-identified as blackheads. Kushite figures such as Nimrod, who appeared in origin traditions and narratives preserved in the Epic of Gilgamesh, reflect cultural memories consistent with African influences across Arabia. So when I'm doing this when I'm doing this slideshow and I'm getting this information ready to present to you guys, I remember very distinctly, one, how beautiful of a notion this is, and how of a thought this is, that Southern Arabia and Mesopotamia and Babylon in and of itself might have a lot more to do with Ethiopic migration than we have been led to believe. And when I settled with this information, I remember, and I want to give thanks to my brethren Rash Jeffrey, who introduced me to a song called Lion Out of Zion. And when you listen to this song, the lyrics from Aki Beka, lead singer of the band Midnight, begin to make a lot more sense as he sings. By the rivers of Jordan, I wash I am the original man, a lion out of Zion. This is what I am, this is what I am. Mesopotamia to Levant, in a gold caravan, 10,000 attendants, in a de Gihan, in a de Kahadran. And he goes on to say, this is my favorite part. This is my favorite part. Sahara to Fertile Crescent, Susa to Bashan, deep into the south of Sudan, the diasporatic dispersion. He who knows the past can interpret the present and predict the future. What are we listening to? A diasporic dispersion, right? From Mesopotamia to Levant. Moving forward. Chaldea and Babylon, Nile Valley, the Arabian cosmological continuum. So over here you have a beautiful depiction that I leaned on artificial or ancestral intelligence because I had to prompt this. AI, the robot can't think of this, I had to give it the information. So this is some ancestral intelligence that we're working with here. The first slide title is the Ur of Chaldees in Babylon stands as a critical cultural and cosmological center in early Arabian and Mesopotamian history. Located in southern Babylonia, Ur is biblically identified as the ancestral homeland of Abraham's lineage, specifically the birthplace of his father Terah, which is spoken about in Genesis 12, 27 through 32, which situates Chaldea at the heart of early Near Eastern transmission. So what does that tell us? In the Torah and the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, when Abraham, the father of the Jews, is spoken of, his ancestry is coming from Chaldea. Many people don't realize Chaldea is in southern Babylon, which is in Mesopotamia. Who were the first Mesopotamians? When KRS talks about Abraham was a black man, born in Africa, we laughed at him. How funny is it really? Comparative cosmological analyses reveal striking structural parallels between Chaldean and Nile Valley systems of sacred astronomy. Chaldean cosmology, preserved in Babylonian 7 tablets of creation, organizes the heaven around 8 primordial waters that later expand into a 12-fold celestial system. This framework mirrors the far older Nile Valley doctrine of the Ogdode, which we mentioned, in which 4 complementary masculine and feminine pairs of Necher-U, or forces of nature, govern the primordial conditions of watery chaos and darkness and visibility and hiddenness. So to wrap up what I just said, this is a recreation of an image of a legitimate theological and cosmological image that I took out of Signs and Symbols of Primordial Man. And what it shows is that the early Chaldean cosmology showed and separated the deities of the skies and the stars into a division of 8. Very like the 4 pairs of 2 Netchers, which also created 8. And after that, it then transmitted into a 12-fold cosmology, much like our zodiac. So what I'm trying to articulate to you, and the best way possible, is even early Chaldean cosmology is synonymous and parallels and follows the same order as early Nile Valley cosmology. Do we all get what I'm trying to say here? Okay. But an 18th century British antiquarian and historian Sir Godfrey Higgins also acknowledged the African origins within early Chaldean astronomy. In his publication, Anacalypsis Volume 2, Higgins conceded, despite personal hesitation, that the foundations of early astronomical knowledge among the Chaldeans could not be separated from African people, stating that the Chaldeans, unfortunately, were indeed Negroes. Okay? Now, Sheikh Anta Diop, in this publication, is a beautiful illustration of the step pyramid, or my apologies, of the Tower of Babel. As a step pyramid, Sheikh Anta Diop proposes that the Tower of Babel is indeed a step pyramid structure, which is comparable to that of the step pyramid of Saqqara, which likely functioned as an astronomical observatory for the Chaldeans. This interpretation allows students of history to recognize Ur of Chaldea as a part of a broader transmission of scientific, cosmological, and architectural intelligence which originated in the Horn of Africa and extended into the Arabian Peninsula. So the question that I have for us, how much of a synchronicity or a random coincidence is it that we have a step pyramid in the Nile Valley through the step pyramid of Saqqara? We just left Mesoamerica, and we know about the steppe periods in Mesoamerica. And now when we're looking into southern Arabia and the Arabia Felix, we see the Tower of Babel also fashioned in the likeness of a steppe pyramid. I also want to mention in regards to Mesopotamian history, when you look at the of Ziggurats, all of those pyramids are also steppe pyramids. So we have to ask ourselves, where is the common source of intelligence? This steppe pyramid is much likely, it is a lot also associated with Jacob's ladder and things of that nature in biblical history in regards to the ascension of Jacob's ladder. So this is something that I want to create for you guys through ancestral intelligence and offer a new idea as to who we're talking about as in relates to early Arabian history and early Chaldean history. We are moving forward eastwards, and as we know, when you move forward eastwards from Arabia, we are now in Asia. Okay? Now, before I go any further, I know we're talking about Paleo-Americans in North America and South America. So why are we in the Andaman Islands of the Bay of Bengal? What business do we have in South India? Very interesting, very good question. Let's unpack it. So the entrance into the Asian corridor, South India and the Andaman world. Now I really want to big up, to my Asian and my Indian culture. Once again, I see amalgamation. I'm here for cooperation and collaboration over competition. And I love speaking about India and the Dravidians. 2003, peer-reviewed study published in the American Journal of Human Genetics demonstrates that the mitochondrial DNA lineages of the Andaman and Nicobar Islanders are exceptionally ancient and genetically different from later Asian populations. They align with models of early human dispersal along the southern coastal route shortly after the exodus out of Africa, upwards of 50 to 70,000 years ago. So once again, my apologies, I didn't highlight, but the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, a lot of people even from India, I talk about the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and they don't really associate as part of India. That's like separating Madagascar from the continent of Africa. I don't really buy it. So this is the area over here in between the Bay of Bengal. And these are the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Now, according to the same peer-reviewed journal, which I just cited from the American Journal of Human Genetics, once again, I'm not a random hotep, American Journal of Human Genetics. They cite it and say that the genetic research identified the Andaman Islanders as descendants of an early out-of-Africa population, and it is further contextualized by documented phenotypic traits which parallel diminutive Africoid populations of the equatorial Central African regions, particularly from regions referred to as the Khoi land, or like in the Congo, or Tan-Netcher, like the land of God. There's an old saying, and the saying says something along the lines of, they used to say that the gods were created in Tan-Netcher, or in the land of Punt, Tan-Netcher. The gods loved to be in Nubia, and the gods were created near the headwaters of Hapi, near Nubia. Very poetic stuff. Now, these parallels include the parallels of the traits, phenotypic traits with the diminutive Africoids and the Andaman Islanders. There are traits that parallel include short stature, dark pigmentation, tightly corned peppercorn hair, and the persistence of stereotypia among women. All traits long documented along Twa and Mbuti populations and interpreted by authors as retained ancestral African characteristics. Now, who here has heard this word stereotypia? Any takers? So that's a very fancy word for splendor. No, I'm joking. Anyways, when you look up stereotypia, what you see is it's a genetic trait which exists in women where there's a lot of accumulated fat in the buttocks and then the hips area, and it's a trait that pretty much, in layman's simplistic terms, come Joel, I'll hold you. In layman's simplistic terms, stereotypia aligns with wide hips and a big butt. So long story short, to be as respectful as possible, the Andaman Islanders are dark pigmented hair, peppercorn hair, dark pigmented skin, and they got a lot of splendor. Hey, Joel, could you sit down? Sit down here, okay? All right, in the 2010, BBC reported on the death of a Boa Senior, last known speaker of the Bo language of the Andaman Islanders, which marked the extinction of a linguistic lineage that researchers identified as exceptionally ancient, potentially tracing back to the earliest out-of-Africa dispersals. Now, the linguists noted that the Bo language showed no close relationship to surrounding Asian languages. Okay, now notably, the Boa senior, which you'll see in the next slide, also had short stature, dark pigment, tightly curled hair, and an overall phenotype closely aligned with those documented among diminutive Africoid populations. All right. Last thing to note is that the Jamaican historian, scholar, and author J.A. Rogers, who authored World's Great Men and Women of Color on that table over there, highlights and describes the Ethiopian King Ganges, who led an African army into Asia and left his name upon the Ganges River itself. When considered along the African substratum of Dravidians in South India, such traditions reflect enduring historical memory of African agency in the formation of early South Asian civilization. So essentially what I'm articulating to us here, folks, is over 50 to 70,000 years ago, you have a populace existing in the stretch of islands called the Andaman and Nicobar Island. Can we say Andaman and Nicobar Islands? Okay, we have a diminutive Africoid presence upwards of 50 to 70,000 years ago who genetically are aligned with the first dispersals of the out of Africa, people out of Africa, the exodus out of Africa. Boom, now look at these people, beautiful. So would you anticipate or would you expect that these people would be living in the regions of India? Look at the carbon melanin, representative of the first people of the earth. Diminutive Africoids, Twa Mbuti, you would swear that they live in the Congo, but no. These are the people that you're going to find at the Andaman and Nicobar Island. Now, I love this picture in particular because this woman resembles my Aunt Judy like a splitting image. It's hilarious. I always love seeing her, big as Aunt Judy. And outside of that, so this is what I show people. This is the face. These are the faces, the peppercorn hair, the dark phenotype, and the beautiful melanin that they're not going to show you. Many people who actually live in India have no idea these people exist. Very relevant while we're going from Asia into the Sahul region. Are you ready to move forward? Beautiful. All right. As I mentioned, what are we speaking about Asia for? Why the Asian corridor matters. From southern coast into the Sahul. Now, discussions of the first Paleo-Americans, Paleo-American being the first people who inhabited the Americas. I'm all for First Nations and indigeneity and all that, but we're talking about Paleo-Americans, the first. So the discussions of the first Paleo-Americans who crossed the Beringia land bridge into Alaska often reference Asian, Siberian, and at times Australo-Melanesian populations as likely contributors for this reason. Contributors. Pause. For this reason, it is essential before proceeding further to examine the earliest history of modern human settlement within the Asian corridor itself. Situated along the eastern edge of the Bay of Bengal, so if I'm not mistaken, this is the Bay of Bengal here, and as I mentioned, the Andaman and Nicobar Islands are right here, okay? So situated on the edge of the Bay of the Bengal, the Andaman and Nicobar Islands occupy a strategic position within the southern coastal corridor of Asia. Their proximity to mainland South and Southeast Asia helps illustrate how early populations were able to continue moving eastward along the southern coast, facilitating dispersals into regions which would later include the mainland Southeast Asia and the island worlds of the Philippines and beyond. Big up to the Philippines. Leading studies by the early 20th century anthropologists documented a widespread of ancient Africoid substratum across Southeast and East Asia. In his 1923 work, The Racial History of Man, Harvard anthropologist Ronald B. Dixon, once again, Harvard anthropologist Ronald B. Dixon described the ancient Khmers of Cambodia as distinctly short-statured, dark-skinned, and bearing what he termed Negroid physical traits. Once again, as I mentioned, these are very 1920s, 1930s verbiage, Negroid, Africoid, whatever, but we got to keep it authentic. Ronald B. Dixon highlighted Negroid physical traits of the Khmers of Cambodia. He also identified Japan's earliest populations as a composite of Proto-Australoid and Proto-Negroid types. These observations align with his historical and ethnographic accounts of the Aita and other Negrito people of the Philippines, collectively pointing to a continuous early population layer that moved eastward along Asia's southern and coastal corridors. So it's very interesting. Once again, now I don't want to take away from the beautiful culture of Cambodia. I am not saying that the Cambodians are distinct. I am not from everyone else. I am not saying that Cambodians are Egyptians. I know people would love to clickbait that, but what I'm saying is in the substratum layer of early Cambodian Khmer history, you have a Harvard anthropologist saying that there were short, diminutive Africoid appearing Negroids in that place. And you want to go look at Ta Prohm and Pre Khan, those are also step pyramids. Coincidence? You tell me. The Sahul landmass, which is one unified, the Sahul landmass, which once unified Australia, Tasmania, New Guinea, and the Aru Islands, formed a continuous prehistoric world into which early coastal migrations from Southeast Asia entered. This unified landscape allowed for sustained interaction, cultural continuity, and the emergence of populations later recognized as Australoid. Can we say Australoid? And Australo-Melanesian. Can we say that? Cool. So although this is Australia, what this is saying is hundreds of thousands of years ago, if not millions of years ago, these big land masses were a lot more connected. And the people who were migrating eastwards, there wasn't as much of a distinction as we would draw from modern borders now. They were all comprised into people who would be reflected in early anthropological verbiage and language as Australoids, Australo-Melanesians, not to necessarily say that they're from Australia, but they would represent people with phenotypic traits of who existed in the Sahul region. Does that make sense? Yes. Beautiful. Moving on. Boom, the Aboriginal Australians, a living node in a deep cultural continuum. I put these illustrations up because when we start talking about there were Australians, there were Siberians, and there. I really want us to get clear on what those people looked like when we're talking about that. It's very quick, it's very easy to just throw words out. What did they look like? A 2016 peer-reviewed genomic study published in Nature titled A Genomic History of Aboriginal Australia demonstrates that the Aboriginal Australians descend from some of the earliest dispersals of modern humans out of Africa and retain a deep ancestral continuity in the Sahul region, which dated back over 50,000 years. Now, despite being separated by more than 9,000 kilometers from Africa, Aboriginal Australians retain several phenotypic traits commonly associated with early modern human populations, which including, once again, it's like Wheel of Fortune, dark pigment, broad nose, morphologically tightly coiled peppercorn hair, full lips. You would think we're talking about the Olmecs all over again. In the context of deep ancestry and early divergence, these features are best understood as retentions of an ancestral African-derived traits rather than recent regional adaptations. So what I'm trying to say here is instead of saying, okay, yeah, they popped up here and it was sunny, that's why they're dark. No, this is a retention of ancestral DNA that mixes and amalgamates to an area. I get that, but this is ancestral. Early Aboriginal Australian cosmology, now this is about to be interesting. Early Aboriginal Australian cosmology preserves a ritualized memory of a primordial cosmic conflict strikingly parallel to the Nile Valley myth of Heru and Set. Here comes another comparative analysis. Ethnographic records interpreted by Albert Churchward, author of Signs and Symbols of Primordial Man, which is illustrations coming out of page 137, show serpent-centered ceremonies in which a chaotic underworld force known as Waluwanka is pursued, struck, and ritually contained beneath the earth, which mirrors the Kemetic narrative of Set's transformation into a serpent and Heru's perpetual vigilance to preserve cosmic order. So essentially what this is saying here is that the ethnographic study shows that the ancient Australians or the ancient Australoids or people of the Sahul region had theological stories that they carved onto the ground, which spoke of Waluwanka, a serpent, hiding and running away and being subdued by a hawk, okay? Taken together, these genetic, phenotypic, and symbolic trait continuities suggest that early human migrations were not isolated events, but part of a continuous cultural and population movement whose later expressions must now be examined in the Americas. So this is the most important bullet slide here, because once again, just like we looked at the step pyramids of the Nile Valley and the cosmological order, and we do a comparative analysis and we ask, how can this be showing up here if it existed in here? That story of a hawk finding a serpent and chasing a serpent down and hovering over the serpent over the a hole which a serpent burrowed itself in is another African tale of order over chaos, light over darkness, Heru preserving over Set. Now I want to give you that illustration to see for yourself. Boom! Here we go with another ancestral intelligence offering with the information, with the prompt, and the historical context of what I've offered. This is what I'm telling you. We had ancient, dark pigmented Indigenes of Australia gathering and drawing on the floor the same story of the serpent, Set, being followed and subdued by Heru. This is a very ancient tale. Now, it was interesting enough, when you look at the serpent mound in Ohio, you also have on a golf course in the USA a 600-foot long serpent-like structure being followed by a hawk. How did this happen? We have the serpent mount in Scotland. We have hieroglyphics, and there's a lot of information here, people. How did this information, how did this theological story of order over chaos, night over day, good over evil, Heru over Set, how did we find this story in the Sahul region, over 9,000 kilometers away from the Nile Valley? Once again, I am not saying this is an Egyptian man. What I am saying is that a potential and highly likely result of the earliest migrations and exodus out of Africa is very likely appearing to me to have given way to an Australoid or Australo-Melanesian people who retained a certain amount of their blood memory and ancestral ritual customs that we see reappearing to us in the form of an illustration. Do we all understand what I'm trying to articulate to you? Yeah. Beautiful. Boom, getting interesting. Beringia. Can we all say Beringia? Beringia is the land bridge, the Wisconsin glaciation, and the Baldwin thesis. So we're about to get into the Baldwin thesis by Harold Baldwin. So the Baldwin thesis is a thesis that he submitted in a paper called Men Out of Asia, which suggests that the multi-layered aspect of indigeneity and indigenous peoples that entered the Alaska or North America came in waves. So we're going to expound. The rest of this segment will be, for the most part, expanding on the Baldwin thesis. During the late Pleistocene, in between 129 to 11,700 years ago, the Earth experienced pronounced climatic fluctuations associated with major glacial cycles, including the Wormian glaciation, which I love speaking about, in Western Eurasia, and the Wisconsin glaciation in Northeast Asia and North America. These ice age conditions caused global sea levels to fall dramatically and exposed vast land masses, most notably Beringia, which temporarily connected Northeast Asia and North America. So when I speak about those glacial epochs, I want to highlight that this laminate I always use to represent the 51st the 51st parallel north, which is the area where a sheet of ice would have been cutting Eurasia in half. And what I want to highlight is in the Western Hemisphere, or in the western part of this area here, the ice age would have been known as the Wormian glaciation, but over here, it was known as the Wisconsin glaciation. So can we say Wormian glaciation and Wisconsin glaciation? So the glaciation and the interstadial that we're talking about, interstadial being a rapid heating or cooling, the interstadial fluctuation of glacial epoch that we're talking about now is in relation to the Wisconsin glaciation. Now, building upon the climatic conditions of the Wisconsin glaciation, archaeologist Harold Sterling Baldwin advanced the Men Out of Asia thesis, arguing that the earliest migration into the Americas consisted of populations closely related to the ancient Sahul people, descendants of the first modern humans who moved eastward along Asia's southern coast. These early migrations shared deep biological, cultural, and technological affinities with Australo-Melanesian populations whose ancestral roots ultimately trace back to Africa's earliest dispersals. So do you see what we're getting at here, people? We're about to enter the first migratory patterns, and we have an anthropologist attesting that the first people who migrated past that land bridge are heavily related to Australo-Melanesians and Australoids. A 2008 peer-reviewed study published in Science titled The Late Pleistocene Dispersal of Modern Humans in the Americas indicates that the genetic evidence supports a dispersal towards the Bering Strait land bridge no earlier than 30,000 years ago, with subsequent migrations into the Americas are occurring after 16,500 years ago. Now, while these populations are commonly referred to as Siberian, this designation reflects their final geographic stage area rather than their deeper ancestral lineage. So once again, it's very easy for somebody to say, those are Siberians, those are Asians. But once again, I understand the geography, but when we look into the first people who entered Asia, who are we talking about? When we look at the first people who were in the Sahul region and likely migrated into Japan and into Siberia, I understand it's Siberia, but who are we talking about? What are their phenotypic traits? What are their customs? What did they look like? In Men Out of Asia, archaeologist Harold Sterling Baldwin proposed that the earliest migrations to cross Beringia belonged to populations he described as Australoid, a historical anthropological term denoting peoples associated with the Sahul, as I mentioned, whose deep ancestry predated the later northeastern population expansions. Now, with this first migratory wave, that one began, the first migration, the Baldwin thesis, Men Out of Asia thesis, is proposing happened around 25,000 years before the Common Era. So the first proposition of the first assumption, submission, or notion of people crossing that land bridge into Canada, we're looking at 25,000 years before the present. Beautiful. Now we're in South America. Big up to Brazil. Rock art of Serra da Capivara, Brazil. Now, early symbolic and artistic expression. Now, what we're looking at is a rock cavern here and a big rock kind of Grand Canyon-looking area in Brazil. Now, what we have there is some of the earliest artistic expression in the Americas recorded of all time. The rock art of Serra da Capivara was brought to international attention in the 1970s through the work of the Brazilian archaeologist Nide Guidon, whose excavations and radiocarbon analysis documented hundreds of painted rock shelters, which leading studies date portions of this artistic tradition to the late Pleistocene, with some panels reaching 25,000 BC. So we have the Baldwin thesis suggesting migrations into the Americas around 25,000 years ago, and now we got rock art in South America, also upwards of 25,000 years ago. Interesting. At Pedra Furada, within the Serra da Capivara complex, early excavations yielded charcoal samples with radiocarbon dates ranging between upwards of 48,000 to 32,000 BCE, with some analyses extending claims as far as 60,000 BCE, which is wild. So while the main leading art is said to be 25,000 years before the Common Era, or before the Common Era, yeah, some art has been dated to be upwards of 40 to 60,000 years old. Now, I'm not gonna lie, that stumps me. I don't have an answer to that. But what I can highlight is it's very interesting, and this is the area of philosophy that I want to lean into, or philosophia, or being a lover of wisdom and posing my own identity or my own thought into the corridor. Because I want to ask us, once again, he who knows the past can interpret the present. And that's what this last bullet point is attesting. This bullet point is not being submitted as an objective fact, but as a theory. The engraved ochre and symbolic artifacts recovered in the Bolombos cave of South Africa, the tip of South Africa, are 70 to 60,000 years old. And they demonstrate that the abstract mark making and pigment use were already well established in South Africa during the late Stone Age, which stylistically are distinct from the figurative panels in Brazil, but they both reflect traditions of early Homo sapiens' symbolic engagement with red pigment. Theoretical discussions of late Pleistocene ocean currents, including the Benguela Current, which links South Africa to South Equatorial Current, has led some researchers to consider whether transatlantic drift may have been possible. Though such scenarios remain speculative and are not necessarily supported by the leading consensus. So once again, what we're saying here is when we remember those world migration patterns and the currents of the world, we remember at the tip of South Africa, There is a Benguela current that goes right up, and if someone's smart, they can hop onto the equatorial current, and you end up in South America. So who's to say that those individuals and those Africans in the caves 60 to 70,000 years before the Common Era, who we know were privy with the aquatic civilization, as we know, as I mentioned, in the Congo, you have a harpoon 90,000 years old. So we have 90,000 years of aquatic privy civilization. If you have a harpoon, you need to know how to navigate the waters to a certain degree. You need to be privy with the water and privy with hunting. So we have people on the tip of South Africa, upwards of 70,000 years ago, and theoretically speaking, who's to say someone didn't hop the Benguela current? Who's to say? I don't know. I'm not going to put out there. Let's start the conversation. This next image is an image of the Bolombo's cave itself. National Geographic and all those people and all the leader Western academia, they love this place because this has rock art in this cave upwards of 70,000 years ago. When you look out, that's how close it is to the water. The cave is literally like a hop, skip, and a jump away from the current, and people were inhabiting this cave for who knows how long, 10,000 years, who knows? Who are we to say whether or not someone jumped on the Benguela current and ended up in South America? It's a theory, okay? Moving forward. Luzia woman, cranial morphology, and the Austro-Melanesian affinities. Now things are getting interesting because we're beginning to lean into the area of genetics. With what we weren't able to necessarily do throughout Mesoamerica, people want genetics, people want studies, people want craniometric, whatnot. We don't have as much in Mesoamerica, sorry, but we do in South America. This is Luzia woman. The skeletal remains, popularly known as Luzia woman, were excavated in 1974 in the Lapa Vermelha, the fourth site in the Lagoa Santa region of Minas Gerais in Brazil, and later identified as belonging to a young adult female who lived approximately 11,500 to 12,500 years ago. These are one of the oldest human skeletons discovered in the Americas. Luzia's cranium became central to scholarly discussions concerning the morphological diversity of early Paleo-American populations. Here's another peer-reviewed journal study. This one coming out of a 2009 study by Walter A. Neves and Mark Hoob, titled Cranial Morphology of Early Americans from Lagoa Santa, Brazil, Implications for the Settlement of the New World. Sounds interesting. This was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and it was one of the most widely cited scientific journals in the world. The study conducted multivariate craniomorphometric analyses of the early Lagoa Santa remains, and they contributed significantly to the scholarly discussion regarding the biological diversity of the early Americas. And you're going to continue to hear me say diversity because things are not homogeneous. Things are not it's not black and white. I am not saying that everyone in South America was black. I am not saying that Egyptians are this. What I'm saying is it was diverse. And what we see by the cranial morphology of the Luzia woman is that shows that. Okay? Now, in the analysis, Neves and Hubbs demonstrated through the multivariate craniometric comparisons that the earliest skulls that come from that region cluster outside the range of later Native American populations. These early crania exhibit a generally narrower, longer, dolichocephalic morphology, and in statistical space show closer affinities to Austro-Melanesians and samples later Austro-Melanesian comparative samples as opposed to later Northeast Asian and derived Native Americans. So once again, we have a skull and a cranial measurements that are representing a dark pigmented woman who has a skull shape much more aligned with Australo-Melanesians and Australoids as opposed to later Northeast Asian and Native American migrations. That's mind-blowing if you ask me. While Neves and Hubbs' morphometric study highlights the biological diversity of archaeological discoveries elsewhere in the Americas, such as a 9,000-year-old female big game hunter burial in Peru, demonstrates that women actively participated in hunting in early American societies. Ethnographic research among the Aita hunter-gatherers of the Philippines further documents female participation in hunting, suggesting that flexible gender roles and substance practices may have characterized early migratory populations more broadly. So in layman terms, while hunting is not something that we necessarily associate with females and with women as it relates to gender roles, when it comes to South America and the Philippines, what we see is that women were actually very prevalent in hunter and gatherers, especially as it relates to the Clovis Folsom people. Women were not disassociated with hunting and gathering, and although Lusia women cannot be associated with that, as I mentioned, there was a peer-reviewed study that showed the skeletal remains of another woman that was buried in Peru with a bunch of hunting and gathering things, and women were definitely big game hunters. So shout out to the big game hunter women of the past, and she looks like she would juke a bison if you tell me. The second migration over Beringia, the Clovis Folsom cultural horizon. In Men Out of Asia, Harold Baldwin proposed a second major migration into North America, which occurred approximately 15,000 years ago during the late Pleistocene. This movement coincided with the retreat of the continental ice sheets and the opening of the interior corridors of northern Canada, which followed the recession of the Keewatin ice sheet. Okay, now these populations are associated with the emergence of what's known as the Clovis and later Folsom flute projectile points, which are over here. So these are the different kind of projectile points you start seeing in Canada, North America, that are associated with big game hunting. The oldest of them are from the Clovis people and later the Folsom people. Okay, with the retreat of the late Pleistocene ice sheets, Clovis Folsom groups expanded across North America of the North American interior, particularly with the Great Plains. Now, by following megafauna such as the bisons we see in the top left and mammoths, they established some of the earliest well-documented big game hunting traditions in North America, leaving behind archaeological signatures that trace rapid geographic spread. Now, while some of the early Clovis skeletal remains were described as exhibiting Australoid cranial features, contemporary research interprets these classifications as reflections of a broader morphological diversity. Current genetics and archaeological consensus indicates that the major of the Clovis people derive from the Northeast Asian ancestral groups. So what I'm trying to say here is I'm not just going to throw the word Australoid onto these people, because at this point, at 15,000 years ago, we are also identifying a very prominent Northeast Asian stratum with the Clovis people. So I can't rule out indefinitely an Australoid or Austro-Melanesian presence, but at this point, we already have a lot of diversity. With the Clovis people, we have to recognize there's a lot of Northeast Asian ancestral groups tied to them as people who migrated over the Beringia land bridge. And as I mentioned, this is the area in northern Canada where we start seeing a lot of these spear-pointed flutes. And as I mentioned, once the ice sheets retreated, they were able to follow the megafauna and enter Turtle Island. Okay? Are we all on the same page? Thanks for listening, Joella. Okay, the Punin skull, revisiting early interpretations of American origins. Now, the Punin skull was discovered in November of 1923 near Punin, Ecuador, during a paleontological expedition conducted by the American Museum of Natural History of New York. Now, this was found embedded within a stratum of volcanic ash, and it was originally dated to be around 10 to 20,000 years old. However, once they directly radiocarbon tested it in 1980, they see that it is actually from the Holocene period, which is just over 7,000 years before the Common Era. Now, the Punin skull was also known as the Punin calvarium, was identified as belonging to, once again, an adult female. You got to admit, with the females and the woman being she who lineage is tied to, who lineage is passed down to, it's kind of awesome how the oldest skulls and the oldest skeletal remains in the Americas are from women. So it's really awesome. And it is based on the cranial gracility and morphological features characterized by, once again, a long, narrow dolichocephalic cranial vault, and a relatively low cranial height. Now, this skull was interpreted by 20th century anthropologists as resembling Australoid morphology. These conclusions were drawn with the racial typology framework of that era. So I want to highlight, Things have changed since the 1920s. Things have changed, but if something has changed, which takes this Dolichocephalak, Austro-Melanesian looking skull away from being referred to as Australoid, someone chime in and someone let me know. But as of right now, that's the leading study. Now, some people might be familiar with the term Dolichocephalak or Brachycephalak or whatnot. Some aren't. So I want to highlight that according to what's known as the Cephalak Index, and then the Encyclopedia Britannica, Dolichocephalak means having a skull with an index below 75, and that has been noted historically as a typical of populations such as the Australian Aborigines as well as Southern Africa. So I'm not going to say every single time a Dolichocephalak skull appears, you're looking at an Aboriginal Australian or a South African. But what I'm saying is the Encyclopedia Britannica aligns those craniometric measurements with that of coming from a South African or Aboriginal Australian descent. Now, given that we just spoke about the earliest exodus out of Africa and we ended up in the Sahel region, I want to ask, is that weird that Southern Africans and Australians would have the same head shape? Not so much to me, if you ask me. From Pliocene symbolic expression in Brazil to the Holocene skeletal finds in Ecuador, South America preserves a deep record of human presence that predates later Caribbean societies, with Taino ancestry rooted in Arawak-speaking populations of the Orinoco River in Venezuela. These patterns invite consideration of how early regional diversity may have contributed to the formation of complex Caribbean cultures. So before I go into the next slide, what I'm essentially saying here is when you look into the origin of the Taino people, you find that they're coming from the Orinoco River Basin in Venezuela. So you have Luzia woman in Brazil, you have the Punan skull from a woman in Ecuador, and then you have Venezuela right there. So my thought process is how much of this information and this human migration and pattern amalgamation played a role in the development of who would become known as the indigenous of the Caribbean people, which were the Taino. Moving forward, from the Orinoco to the Caribbean, the emergence of Taino civilization. And this is, and I want to highlight before I go much further, because we're about to wind down. After this, we're going to be pretty much looking at the last two migrations, and then we're going to close out with the Gullah Wars. But why this is awesome is because I'm usually talking about deep antiquity, but we're about to connect all of that to us right now. Because in our last slides, we're in the 17th century. We're only a few hundred years away. So rock with me, we're almost done. But we're about to connect it with the indigeneity of the Americas and the Caribbean, and we want to ask ourselves about land rights. Now, the Taino were an Arawakan-speaking indigenous peoples whose cultural ancestry is widely traced to northeastern Southern America, particularly the Orinoco River Basin of what is now Venezuela, from where groups moved northward into the Caribbean. Genetic, linguistic, and archaeological evidence indicates that pottery making, Arawakan agriculturists associated with the Saladoid tradition began entering the islands around 3000 to 2000 BCE. Now, by approximately 500 years before the Common Era, the Taino cultural traditions had become firmly established in the Caribbean. Now, this is a really important slide, so this whole slide is important, so pay attention. Taino cultural traditions have become firmly established in the Caribbean, expanding throughout Hispaniola, the Dominican Republic and Haiti, Puerto Rico, Cuba, Jamaica, the Bahamas, and surrounding islands. Rooted in earlier South American Arawakan traditions, Taino society developed organized agricultural systems such as the cassava cultivation, sophisticated ceramic production, and stratified chiefdom-based in political cultures. Now listen to this. During this broader formative period, contemporaneous civilizations such as the Olmec in Mesoamerica were also flourishing, which illustrates how multiple indigenous societies across the Americas were independently advancing complex cultural systems within overlapping regional spheres. We had the Olmec popping off and doing their thing in the Gulf of Mexico, and now we have the Taino in South America doing their thing. They're not too far away. I'm not saying the Taino or the Olmec, I'm not saying the Olmec or the Taino, but I want to highlight how different, diverse indigenous peoples were ruling and rising in or around the same time. Scholars such as Sebastian Robio Lemarche, author of Taino and the Caribs, challenged earlier colonial narratives that framed the Taino as extinct And he emphasized that instead of continuity of indigenous presence in the Caribbean, modern genetic research of Caribbean historiography support this reassessment, and they demonstrate that the indigenous lineages, particularly through the maternal line, once again, particularly through the maternal line, persist within contemporary Caribbean populations, suggesting cultural, biological survival rather than disappearance. So if we step away from the notion that the Tainos are all wiped out, none of them remain, and we recognize that they dispersed and migrated into the Caribbeans, in Costa Rica, in the Bahamas, in Jamaica, in Hispaniola, as the Dominican Republic and Haiti. How far-fetched of an idea is it that through the matrilineal line where the lineage is held from to the mother, that ancestry still lives and that persists? I have a grandfather that comes from Haitian ancestry. I ought to get a little bit more familiar with my ancestry. Who's to say? Who's to say that Maya's Jamaican ancestry doesn't also have Taino ancestry? We don't know, but the information is there. Now, recognizing the persistence of Taino ancestry and cultural continuity in the Caribbean challenges simplistic notions of the indigenous extinction, and it complicates the modern definitions of indigeneity. This historical reassessment invites deeper conversations about identity, historical justice, and the place of Afro-Caribbean communities within broader discussions of indigenous recognition and land rights. Because I want to highlight, I think it's very unlikely anyone is going to be taking anyone serious about conversations of reparations if you don't got land. But if the conversation begins to become a little bit deeper, we begin recognizing maternal ancestry tied in with the Taino, I think there's a conversation there. And I think the conversation of reparations becomes a little bit more serious. You understand what I'm saying, everyone? Boom. Big up to the Algonquin people. Being that I'm from Canada and North America, and I used to live in Calgary, Alberta, I've spent a plethora of time around people of this of the population and of this culture, and I had to do my diligence and give them some representation and highlight their magnificence as it relates to the indigeneity as well. The Algonquin are indigenous to the Ottawa River Valley in Canada and its tributaries in present-day Quebec and Ontario, identifying themselves as the Anishinaabe, which translates to the original person or a good human. Now, archaeological evidence places ancestral populations in the Ottawa River watershed for at least 10 to 12,000 years, although the Algonquin oral traditions describe a great migration roughly 2,000 years ago, so maybe around 1000 BCE. That brought their ancestors from regions further east along the Atlantic coast. Now, the Algonquin are one nation within a broader Anishinaabe cultural and linguistic group, which includes people like the Ojibwe, Chippewa, the Odawa, the Nipissing, and the people of the Mississaugas. These nations share linguistic roots within the Algonquin language family and developed interconnected trade networks, seasonal mobility patterns, and woodland-based lifeways across the Great Lakes. Now, while the Algonquin and broader Anishinaabe peoples are deeply rooted in the Ottawa River region and central Canadian history, the peopling of the Americas unfolded over many thousands of years and across vast geographies. Archaeological and genetic evidence reflects regional diversity. I'm big on my DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Let's all get in on this. Diversity among indigenous populations of North, Central, and South America, which is evident in the emergence of complex societies such as the Olmec of Mesoamerica, of the Andean civilization of South America, and the woodland cultures of North and the maritime traditions of the Caribbean, each contributing greatly to the cultural foundations of what many indigenous nations call Turtle Island, which is where we live. Lastly, Turtle Island is a name used by many indigenous nations to refer to North America, rooted in the creation narratives in which the earth was formed upon the back of a great turtle. We're on our third migration, and these were the Algonquin people. We got one more migration to go. You guys are awesome. We're almost done. Judah and Jola, thank you for your attention. And we are going to wrap this up with one more migration, and then we're going to bring it back home into the southern areas of the Carolinas with the Gullah Wars, and then we're done. Boom, the fourth migration, these beautiful people. The Arctic expansion and the ancestors of the Inuit. In Harold S. Baldwin's thesis of the Men Out of Asia, he proposed a fourth migration which would have occurred around the 500 years before the current era, which is associated with the arrival of Arctic peoples he later identified as the Inuit, or the Eskimo. He regarded this migration as culturally and physically distinct from the earlier waves that had entered Turtle Island. And now contemporary archaeological research places the major expansion of Inuit ancestors within the Thule culture, which emerged around 1,000 years after the Common Era. Genetic research confirms that the Inuit populations descended primarily from later Siberian and Chukotka Arctic groups, representing one of the most recent major migrations into North America. Now, the last slide says that the late Inuit expansion reinforces that the peopling of Americas, once again, was not a single migration, but a prolonged, multi-layered, and multifaceted process of spanning tens of thousands of years, from the Arctic to the Gulf Coast to the Caribbean and into deep South America. Diverse indigenous societies emerged across Turtle Island, each shaped by distinct migratory histories, environments, and cultural innovations. Any attempt to compress this vast story into a single homogeneous narrative overlooks the biological, linguistic, and cultural diversity that defined the development of the Americas. So what I'm suggesting here is anyone that tries to paint the indigeneity as everyone looks like Pocahontas, I'm sorry, it doesn't hold up. There was way too much diversity. It happened for over tens of thousands of years. They came from there, they came from there, they came from there. It's a lot more complex of a story than we've been led to believe. Boom! So here we are, people. We have arrived as Turtle Island. We were first looking at Africa, then we looked at Arabia, and now we're here. By this point in time, I hope that I've done my diligence, and if I haven't legitimately, quote-unquote, objectively proven a new thesis, I hope I've given you enough information to question what we've been told, to question the notion that black people came here as a result of transatlantic slavery, to question the notion that Christopher Columbus discovered the New World. I would argue, tens of thousands of years prior to Christopher Columbus, the New World was inhabited. We were rocking out. We had Olmecs, we had Tainos, we had Algonquin people, we had Nubians, we had everyone. So on this beautiful planet, I want to highlight that this is an opportunity for collaboration and cooperation over competition. I welcome all of my Indigenous, First Nation, Anishinaabe people to recognize the diversity and the equity that existed amongst us that allowed us to thrive. And to close this lecture out, there is no better slide and piece of history to highlight as opposed to the Gullah Wars, which is the epitome of collaboration and cooperation between First Nations people and people of African Caribbean descent. And so I really appreciate you guys rocking out with me and holding out. We got another 5 slides and we are done. Boom, the Dawes Rolls. Now we're in the 18th century, people. The Dawes Rolls in between 1893 and 1914. Many people don't know about this, so I want us to listen clearly. In 1893, the United States Congress established the Dawes Commission to negotiate the 5 tribes in Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma, regarding the division of their communal lands. Created during an era of aggressive federal expansion, the commission's stated purpose was to facilitate land allotment and formalize agreements between tribal nations and the federal government. The process of official enrollment, which would later produce the Dawes Rolls, began with the Curtis Act in 1898. Now, during the Curtis Act of 1898, the indigenous identity was recast through federally imposed categories such as by blood or a freeman or intermarried into a white family, which transformed kinship-based blogging into one of bureaucratic classification. In this environment, allegations of bribery and fraudulent enrollment emerged most notably with the controversy surrounding the quote-unquote $5 Indian, a term used to describe individuals who paid to secure placement on the rolls. The episode underscored how federal control over recognition introduced social hierarchy. Now, the Dawes Rolls closed in 1907 with the last few edits in 1914, and by the conclusion of this period, the United States formally recognized citizens of only 5 tribal nations for allotment purposes: the Cherokee Nation, the Choctaw Nation, the Chickasaw Nation, the Muskogee Creek Nation, and the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma. These nations were labeled as the 5 civilized tribes. And this is an image, a real-life image of the Dawes Rolls. So once again, people don't realize, but until the end of, by the end of the 18th, 19th century, all of a sudden they put a new stamp of approval and said, all of a sudden we're only gonna recognize 5, quote-unquote, civilized tribes. But what was happening before them? Oh no! Okay, well, you're not gonna see that image, but it's okay. I'll work with it. Whoever wants the image later, hit me up, I'll send it to you. It looks like it's the nuance. So what this image was an original depiction of the tribes of Turtle Island. You'll see the Apache down here. You'll see the Blackfoot, and you'll see a plethora of different, beautifully named, beautifully historically rich, different indigenous and First Nations communities and tribes and nations. So my question is, who gets to wipe them all out and say we're only going to recognize 5? It's ludicrous, nonsense. One of the 5, as I mentioned, were the Seminoles, and that's what we're going to be finishing off talking about now. The Seminole War, or the Gullah War, or the Invisible War, or the war that never happened. This book talks about that war and how the Seminoles and the Gullah Geechee African enslaved people banded together. Okay? Now, you can't see because the screen is blurred, but the Seminoles nations are down here by Florida and the Oklahomas. So the last slides are going to be a highlighting of some of these wars, some of these skirmishes that are historically valid and present. And I want to highlight once again, how cooperation and collaboration supersedes and surpasses competition. And I want to see how far a people can go with that premise and that framework. The Gullah Wars, the Seminole Confederation, Indigenous African Alliance, and the Southern Borderlands. So as I mentioned, the Seminoles are known to be down here. And this depiction out of that book shows that Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Delaware were all prominently and very heavily populated by 78% Black, Caribbean, African, Gullah Geechee people. Now, the Seminoles emerged in the 18th century as a coalition of Muskogee-speaking people. Through the 18th and 19th century, African fugitives fleeing enslavement in the Carolinas and the Georgia found refuge among Seminole communities. Now, I know that there's a lot of history that has to do, some people would suggest in history that Native Americans enslaved Black people. What are you talking about? Guess what? As a historian, I can also say that there was a point in time where Africans enslaved each other too. It's not a proud history, and I'm not saying that certain First Nations people didn't take part in that. What I'm saying is that that's a part of history. And although that may have happened, I want to recognize what happened prior to that. Because prior to that, there was a lot of cooperation, as I mentioned. So now, during the conflicts commonly known as the Seminole Wars, Seminole and Black fighters engaged U.S. forces through coordinated guerrilla tactics across swamps and river systems, such as the Suwannee, and some scholars have reframed these struggles as part of a broader Gullah War, emphasizing the central role of African Maroon communities, whose resistance was often obscured as a singular label of Seminole. So they wanted to just make it seem like a broader Seminole War. They don't want to talk about the Gullahs, but the Gullah Geechee were indeed evident. And here we go, people. These are the wars. These are the conflicts. Okay? Relax. So the first conflict was the Stonewall Rebellion, which happened in the 17th century, 1739 to be honest. Now, it began on September 9th near the Stonewall River in South Carolina. At the time, enslaved Africans vastly outnumbered Europeans in parts of the colony. Now, they were led by an enslaved man known as Jemmy. Approximately 20 to 30 Africans seized weapons from a store, killed slaveholders, and marched south towards Florida under a banner reportedly reading "Liberty." The rebellion resulted in the deaths of 20 to 25 colonists and approximately 35 to 50 Africans, with additional participants later executed. Now, in response, South Carolina enacted the Negro Act of 1740, which severely restricted the movement, education, and assembly of enslaved Africans in an effort to prevent future uprisings. The Stonewall Rebellion will forever be highlighted as one of the biggest slave uprisings in America. Okay? The Stonewall Rebellion, 1739. Moving on. The next one, the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, 1814. The Battle of Horseshoe Bend took place on March 27, 1814, along the Tallapoosa River in present-day Alabama during the Creek War, a conflict within the broader War of 1812. Now, the combatants were the Red Stick factions of the Muskogee, Creek, and the nation, and the U.S. forces, which was led by Major General Andrew Jackson. Now, the Red Stick forces fortified a peninsula bend in Tallapoosa River, and the battle resulted in the deaths of approximately 800 Red Stick warriors, marking one of the deadliest defeats of Native forces in early U.S. history. In subsequent treaty of Fort Jackson. In the aftermath, many Red Stick survivors fled south into Spanish Florida. So first was the Stonewall Rebellion, 1739. Now in 1814, we have a very big Battle of Horseshoe Bend. These are real depictions. These are all battles and skirmish which took place in order for the slaves to free themselves. You know, they always say Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. I argue differently. It looks like they were freeing themselves. The destruction of Negro Fort, 1816 in Florida. Now, this occurred on July 27th, 1816, along the Alapachicola River in Florida. The fort was originally built by the British during the War of 1812 and was later occupied by enslaved Africans and their allied Seminole forces. The fort was heavily armed with cannons, and they viewed it as a threat. And now American forces under General Edmund Gaines and Lieutenant Colonel Clinch moved to eliminate what they considered a destabilizing presence in the Georgia border. Now, on July 27, 1816, they opened fire with gunboats, and something inside there blew up, and instantly about 300 people, African, Caribbean, Gullah Geechee, and Seminoles lost their lives. So what they didn't realize, what they learned is that it was not smart to hold up into a building. They were very receptive to a lot of casualties and a lot of losses of life. So this was a huge loss at the destruction of Negro Fort on July 27th in 1816. Now, this began the First Seminole War from 1817 to 1818, the destruction of Negro Fort. All right, now things are getting interesting. We're getting smarter. Once again, cooperation and collaboration over competition. The Battle of Suwannee River, 1818. This happened in April along the Suwannee River in Florida during what is known as the First Seminole War. Now, Jackson's forces attacked the Seminoles near the Suwannee River that were inhabited by Seminoles and black allies, including communities associated with the leader Bowlegs. Now, although the U.S. forces claimed victory, the Seminole and the black fighters avoided large-scale capture by dispersing strategically. Now, the Battle of Suwannee reinforced the United States' willingness to invade Spanish territory in pursuit of suppressing both indigenous resistance and black freedom communities. The campaign contributed to Spain's eventual cession of Florida to the United States in 1819 and further intensified. We got about 2 more battles, people, and that is it. Boom. This one, I enjoy this one. The Massacre of Major Dade. On December 28th, 1835, we got smart. You guys caught us lacking the Negro Fort. We take it to the swamps. That's what I like to hear. December 28th, 1835, during rising tensions, Seminole leaders over forest removal policies, Major Dade led approximately 110 soldiers into Tampa towards Fort King in central Florida. Now, as Dade's column moved through the dense Florida pine woods and palmetto terrain, Seminole and black allied fighters who were well acquainted with the landscape prepared a concealed ambush. The battle lasted several hours, and surviving soldiers attempted to form a defensive position. Ultimately, almost all 110 troops were killed. Only 2 soldiers initially survived the battlefield. Seminole and black casualties were minimal by comparison. The event became one of the most decisive indigenous victories in U.S. forces in the 19th century. Okay, so this is what happens when people work together, collaboration over competition. The Massacre of Major Dade. Major Dade found out right then, let's take it to the swamps. I believe this is the last massacre, people. The Battle of Lake Okeechobee, 1837. This is not too far away from here, right? 1837. December 25th, 1837, Merry Christmas. During the height of the Second Seminole War, a force under Colonel Zachary Taylor advanced into the Florida Everglades seeking to engage Seminole and black allied fighters, led by Alligator Sam Jones and the Cocoocee Wildcat. The Seminole and black fighters positioned themselves along a dense hammock bordering the Lake Okeechobee, concealed behind sawgrass, marshland that the U.S. troops to advance through waist-deep water. As U.S. troops advanced, they encountered intense fire from concealed positions. The battle resulted in significant American casualties, particularly among officers, while Seminole and black losses were comparatively lower. Now, the U.S. officially recorded the victory, but you can see their casualties. So this is the last of the Seminole Wars, or the Gullah Wars, or the 100-year War from 1739 to 1858. This was the last one at 1837. So I want to highlight at a point in time in our world, in our social climate, where we're looking in confusion to government rulers, to tyranny, to things that are, to atrocities and unspoken things that are happening to the community, where we're thinking that this isn't going to work anymore. What do? I want to remind ourselves. And I'm not going to, this is not a threat. No one come for me. But when you put it in context, we already went to bat with the United States Army. and they had to cease and desist. It was proven that Abraham had to free the slaves because all this killing was getting very expensive. They couldn't afford to they couldn't afford the casualties. They couldn't afford the millions of dollars of ammunition because war cost money. And when they couldn't stop the Gullah Geechee and the Seminoles from advancing, they said, you know what, let's tell them that they're free. I want to highlight, tyrannical governments being overthrown is not something that is beyond us. When people band together and they show what they've had enough with, and there's enough collaboration and cooperation, things happen like this. Battle of Lake Okeechobee, Battle of the Suwannee River, of Horseshoe Bend. So I want to highlight, this isn't that far away from history, and we might need a little bit of battling right now. Boom! This is it, people. This is my last ancestral intelligence I'm leaving you with, and I can't express enough how excited and thankful I am to offer this, a vision into my heart, a vision into my psyche and into my subconscious of what I'm proposing to you. Melanated people, indigenous people, both indigenous in their own way, cooperating. There's corn soup, there's mud, there's horses, there's axes, there's culture. All in the swamps, all in the Florida Everglades. I want to highlight that indigeneity is not something that is gate-kept to people that look like Pocahontas. Indigeneity is a very complex notion that has to be looked at in an all-encompassing, multi-layered conception in a way that tells a history and includes all who were included. Not too long ago, over just a few hundred years ago, there was cooperation between those who consider themselves First Nations and people who consider themselves part of the African Caribbean diaspora. Indigeneity is a complex, multi-layered notion, and I really welcome us all to go deeper into the conversation and expand further and question who gets to gatekeep the notion, who gets to call themselves an indigenous person, who gets to keep others outside. I hope that by the end of this presentation, by the end of this thesis, by the end of this expression of my heart to yours, we all can reflect on the concept of indigeneity once more and recognize that it's much more complex than we might think, and we have some work to do. So thank you all for your time, attention, respect, investment into this project. This is from my heart to yours. I appreciate you guys wholeheartedly, and that concludes the presentation.
Before you all decide to rush out of here, let's once again give recognition. Study, research, somebody took the time, the effort, and the dedication to research this information and deliver it to us.
Go sit down.
Can you go back?
Once again,
Go sit down.
this is university caliber stuff, and here we are sitting down listening to a plumber. Come on now. Come on now. So, questions, thoughts, reflections, feed forward. Anybody? Yes.
Could you touch a little, give us a little more definition on that term, diminutive Africoid?
Diminutive. So that refers to the first anatomically modern men, as it relates to the first Homo sapiens sapiens that would have been beginning to arise in the Omo River Valley of Ethiopia. A lot of these people possess traits that are likened to the first people of like the Khoisan regions of South Africa and the people of like the Twa Mbuti people. We would refer to them as pygmies, but that's kind of a derogatory term. Some people would refer to them as dwarves, but those are people like diminutive Africoids would be the first, like the most ancient form of like African ancestry. Much deals with the Congo Basin.
So that word, could you give us more on that specific word, diminutive? what that word denotes
I would say
here?
that's kind of like an old school word. That's like an old school word, an old school anthropological word, much like an Australoid from like the 1920s and 30s, and that was their best attempt to articulate, people that have those distinctively unique characteristics. People that are 3 feet tall, 4 feet tall. So once again, that was the word that anthropologists best used to articulate and try to encapsulate why these people are dwarves and pygmies and things of that nature. But you're going to see, like you would find people associated with the Twa and Mbuti in the Khoi land, in the Congo Basin, in South Africa, whatnot. Those are people that, once again, as you remember, in the Ongi people in the Andaman and Nicobar Island, you have the same diminutive, short stature, pygmy, Twa-like people. So that's more so just like a choice word coined by anthropologists in the early 19th century. It might not be as popular of a word anymore. Some people don't agree with it anymore, but it's a real word. So I wanted to give you the real word and give it to you how they gave it. You know what I mean?
Seeing. So let me just recap to see if I got you right on. So what I was listening, you're saying the earliest Homo sapien migrations. So you were saying that there could be an earlier migration of African population off the coast of Africa from the currents, correct?
A theoretical Benguela current, yeah.
Okay. And then after that, you're saying there's an older East Asian through the Bering Strait over time.
Yeah, so the Bering Strait migration, as it's proposed in the Men Out of Asia thesis or the Baldwin thesis, the Australoids are proposed to have entered the North America or Canada and Alaska upwards of 25,000 years before the Common Era. But the information in the Bolumbos caves and that art is 60,000 years old. So I threw that out there intentionally to show that even though we have everything worked out, there are still historical anomalies that I don't have an answer to.
Don't have a clear.
But that's why I threw it as a theory. If people were existing in the Bolumbos caves and if they were savvy and they had an aquatic civilization, who's to say they didn't jump on that current? I can't prove they did. I can't prove they didn't. But I highlight the data and I put it on the table and we can create our own conception, our own thesis. You know what I mean?
So are you saying the Afro continues into the West here through that East Asian because the first dispersions of those Asians were out of Africa.
Yeah.
And what they retained of their first ancestors from the first dispersions they brought with them over the Bering, thereby bringing African culture and ritual and symbolism.
By default. And even if I'm not saying that they were Egyptians, I'm not saying that they were Cushites, what I'm saying is that these are descendants of the first exodus out of Africa and who retained distant, dormant theological concepts and phenotypic traits. So whether someone asks me if they're black, I'm not here to use the word black. I don't need to use the word black.
It's difficult, right?
I don't need to bottle that. I don't need to black as a new term. I just highlight where they came from, what they looked like, and what their culture looked like, and we can do the rest with that. Yeah.
I feel that. Yes, sir. Give thanks. Give thanks.
Thanks for the question.
Thanks for your question, brother. Thoughts?
So one thing I realized when you're talking about the Americas, like U.S. with the cultures and the American Indians or the people of that time. So, I've been noticing. I'm going to relate back to sports now, and I noticed that the baseball team formerly called the Cleveland Indians. There was this whole uproar about that for the past 20, 30 years, and then they finally changed the name to the Guardians. And then you have the Washington Redskins. That was a whole nother big thing. And they finally changed the name to the Commanders. So I don't know. I don't want to give you I don't feel I feel like they're getting rid of the history by changing the name. So how do you feel about that? Because
I would agree with you. Based on the fact that I'm not as much of a sports guy, I don't have a definitive answer. But what I would say is that things like that nature don't happen by accident and they're not intentionally. And if they have a way to take out the word Seminole from somewhere or take out Redskins, that they're going to do it because there's memory in these words. Seminole, we can look at how deep the history of the Seminoles are. So if I have a vested interest in continuing to keep the division between First Nations and Caribbean people, that I would say that there's a vested interest in removing that or keeping it hidden. Because this is, once again, I would suggest that this isn't history that they would want to teach the children. Who wants to teach that Seminole, First Nations, and African Caribbeans were working together and the U.S. couldn't stop them? You know, like they couldn't, they weren't being stopped.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So that's a very deep history that is worth being hidden depending on what your vested interest behind it is. That's what I would say.
Thank you.
I like to that. Part of that subtext is that some of these names were appropriated by white commercial establishment for profit.
Yes.
And the indigenous people, the Redskin and the Seminoles, were not reaping
Exactly.
any benefits from the use of their names in professional sports. So that's part of the subtext.
Yep.
Just so I can understand. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the sisters in the room? I'd like to hear your voice as well.
Yeah, just the fact that this came out, I know you instructed and prompted, but it's really powerful to see a visual representation of all of our cultures and how we can, like you said, collaborate, work together. And when we think about where we're going, like you said, it's not much different than what we've done in the past. And we just have to remember these times of when we celebrated the diversity and the commonalities between all of our lineages. So thank you for creating this. Thank you for the information. It's incredibly powerful.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
And no question, just thank you. That was really incredible and received a lot from it. It's going to be integrating, metabolizing in my consciousness for a while, especially going to Mexico next month and being right there, some of the places you named, and seeing it with different eyes. So really exciting. Thank you, Jaden.
Thank you.
Yes, remarkably in your presentation, you mentioned Italiano.
Yeah.
You mentioned Filipino.
Collaboration.
You mentioned the Vedic, South Asian, Indian connection. It seems like there is a tapestry
An amalgamation. Yeah.
that runs across humanity. And part of that tapestry, an integral part of that tapestry, is the African connection from antiquity. It's beautiful, which demonstrates that no matter how we look where we are, we're somewhat connected.
Absolutely.
I think that's what I'm getting from
Yep.
the presentation, which is amazing because I think part of oppression, history of oppression, is to divide, conquer, separate, and to make some people superior and some inferior. So what I'm hearing from your message is that to some degree, we all stem from the same roots
Yes.
and share a common ancestor,
Yep.
which we should celebrate.
Yeah. That's why I like when some people say that there's only one family, the human family. And I resonate with that. Regardless of how Pan-African I might be, I see the humanity in us all. And before borders and before phenotypes were used to divide, we're a human family. So I can band together with any human so long as they're not riddled with dogma. Whether you're in Asia, Europe, the Americas, or the Caribbean, we're a human family. And I think we're gonna get much further with collaboration and cooperation over competition. So I hope that this conversation of indigeneity opens that door and recognizes we all have a seat at the table.
This could be a History 101.
Could be, huh?
Yeah. In elementary school. Like as storytelling, you know, to get children really
Connected. Yeah.
with history. And if what you're saying, the first civilization 300,000 years ago started in Africa, we're all Africans.
Yeah.
You know, it's where do they migrate?
Yeah.
And how we mutated
Exactly.
into a lighter skin.
And it's a beautiful story.
Based on where we ended up. Like my culture, the European culture, the Italian culture, is what? 30, 40,000 years ago,
Yeah.
or less. But where did they come from?
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are many black people in Italy and Sicily,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that originated there possibly 40,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Your story is true.
Mm-hmm.
That
It's beautiful.
that is my ancestry
Yeah.
as well. So we are truly all one.
Yeah.
Not only do we bleed the same,
Exactly.
we are one.
Mhm.
We just have different cultures.
Yep.
And that basically evolved over time. Our skin colors mutated over time. But when you look at the top, and I actually drew this out before I came here,
Mm-hmm.
exactly what you're speaking of, your timelines.
Yeah.
I think I got most of them.
Nice.
And what it is at the very top is Africa. And what's at the bottom is South America.
Mm-hmm.
And everything in between that.
Yeah.
So, you know,
I'm glad that you got that.
there's a lot of critical thinking here, but, you know, that's just, what do I know?
Yeah. I love that. Thank you for offering that. And you're right. You know, at the core, it's a human family thing, and just a recognition for everyone to be able to be recognized. You know what I mean? So I appreciate you for saying that. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. So, you mentioned children, and we happen to have a few here tonight. I would have loved to see more children in the house, but we have 4, 5. Yes, 5 beautiful children here tonight. 6? How are you? Oh, yeah, right. Big boy. But it's the first time I think you've had your daughter here
Yeah.
listening to your presentation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to leave the last word to you and ask you to speak about that and what that means.
Cool. So those of you who pay attention can recognize that any opportunity I can to highlight matrifocal origins of humanity, the importance of women, the importance of mothers, and how women have served as the initial inspiration for the conception of theology. That comes from a source of inspiration, and that inspiration in and of itself, while a few things included or associated with it, one of the core and pivotal foundational pieces of inspiration that go into all things matrifocal origins of humanity is having a daughter, and is recognizing the fact that we are born into a world where one day someone will convince her that she's a helpmate. Someone will want to convince her that she is lesser than because she's a woman, or that she doesn't have a role in high culture. She doesn't have a place at the table as a leader because she's a woman. Being a father to a young girl who grows up in this kind of dogmatic patriarchal world, I have made it an endeavor a long time ago to ensure that bodies of work like this and other things related can be used as something to offer my daughter in the future, to allow her to recognize the importance and the contribution of women, and how foundational this is the reverence and veneration and understanding and understanding of all things womb, wisdom, and women have gone into high culture. We wouldn't be who we are today without interpreting the skies and recognizing womb wisdom through them. So my daughter being here for the first time is monumental. She probably has no time for it, but that's fine. One day she'll look back and we'll look back at the stories and it'll be good. So this is my daughter's first time watching me perform. This is my son, my young Naga Negrito son, Judas, his second time. Extraordinary leadership. He would have loved to have performed an acoustic special for you, but I wasn't prepared. Next time you'll be able to. So having my son in the room, having my queen, my one-day wife, the first lady in the room, Maya, is a symbiote. Always held by her divine feminine horns of Het Heru. So thank you very much. And it all comes back to water and women.
Thank you.